Somalis in Mogadishu and officials in the United States are condemning comments made by US President Donald Trump this week after he repeatedly referred to Somalis as garbage, claiming they contribute nothing and that their country stinks. The remarks made during a cabinet meeting and later in exchanges with reporters have sparked outrage both in Somalia and Minnesota, home to the largest Somali diaspora in the US.
Tension erupted overnight. One speech in the United States sent shockwaves across the Horn of Africa, igniting outrage from Mogadishu to Minneapolis. Somalia struck back with a powerful diplomatic response. Regional blocs condemned the remarks, and global observers watched as a fragile partnership suddenly trembled. What happens when a few words threaten years of international cooperation? This is the moment everything changed.
The first shockwave did not come from a battlefield, a security briefing, or a leaked report. It came from a podium in the United States, where senior leadership issued remarks that instantly ignited one of the most intense diplomatic flare-ups between Washington and Mogadishu in years. The words, broadcast across global networks within minutes, painted Somalia and its citizens in deeply negative terms. The tone was sweeping, dismissive, and inflammatory, so much so that the reaction from Somalia was immediate, unified, and unmistakably fierce. Across Somalia's capital, the comments spread like wildfire. Local media replayed the remarks over and over, fueling a rising tide of public outcry. Market stalls, tea shops, and university courtyards became the epicenters of discussion as citizens voiced frustration and disbelief. Many saw the statements as an attack not only on migrants abroad, but on the national identity itself. What stunned the public most was not criticism of policy or governance. Somalis have long engaged openly with such debates, but the broad condemnation of an entire nationality framed as though an entire people could be reduced to a single negative label. In Somalia's large global diaspora, especially within Somali American communities, the shock was even sharper. Families who had spent decades building businesses, studying, working, and contributing to local economies in the United States found themselves suddenly thrust into a national spotlight they had never asked for. Advocacy groups reported a spike in fear, especially among younger diaspora members who felt the remarks could embolden discrimination. Community centers described receiving anxious calls from people unsure if the rhetoric would translate into policy shifts or social hostility. Somalia's institutions moved swiftly. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a direct and strongly worded condemnation, rejecting the characterization of Somalia as unworthy or degraded. Officials emphasized that the country, despite its challenges, was rebuilding through sacrifice, resilience, and determination. The government reminded the international community that Somalia had made significant strides in security cooperation, governance reforms, and counter-extremism partnerships, many of them coordinated closely with the United States itself. Still, the Somali government chose its tone carefully. Even as outrage rippled across the country, Mogadishu avoided escalating the dispute into a wider diplomatic confrontation. Analysts noted that this restraint reflected strategic awareness. Somalia relies on strong partnerships with global institutions, including the United States, for military assistance, development funding, and stability operations. A deliberate decision was made to defend national dignity without severing cooperation. Across the United States, institutions and civil society organizations reacted as well. Human rights groups criticized the rhetoric as discriminatory and dangerous, warning that such language, especially when spoken by national leadership, could fuel xenophobia. Immigration policy organizations highlighted concerns that the remarks reinforced negative stereotypes not only of Somalis, but of refugees and migrants more broadly. Several U.S.-based research centers emphasized the long-standing contributions of Somali communities in American cities, warning that such rhetoric undermines social cohesion and weakens the trust essential for effective community integration. Beyond the bilateral relationship, the controversy quickly escalated into a global conversation. Regional blocs, such as the African Union, expressed concern over the implications of the remarks, describing them as harmful to diplomatic cooperation between Africa and major Western powers. Some regional leaders privately suggested that the remarks fit into a broader pattern of dismissive language directed toward African nations in recent years. For them, Somalia's strong response was not just national defense. It was a stand for dignity across the continent. International observers from Europe, the Middle East, and the United Nations began examining what the fallout might mean for stability in the Horn of Africa. Somalia remains a critical partner in global counterterrorism efforts, and cooperation with Western states, particularly the United States, is central to ongoing operations against extremist threats. If diplomatic tensions were to deepen, analysts warned, it could disrupt military coordination, delay strategic programs, and weaken efforts to stabilize the region. Economic considerations also came into play. Somalia's economy depends heavily on international support, including development assistance and remittances. Any perception of hostility between Somalia and a major global power risks future investment flows and donor confidence. Furthermore, the Somali diaspora, one of the largest sources of remittances into the country, may become caught in a political crossfire that affects their livelihoods, mobility, and sense of belonging. Why did the controversy escalate this quickly? Experts point to a combination of identity politics, historical memory, and geopolitical sensitivity. Somalia, long portrayed internationally through the lens of conflict, famine, and instability, has worked hard to reclaim its narrative. Public messaging from foreign powers that reinforces outdated or demeaning stereotypes is therefore met with heightened sensitivity, not simply because the words are offensive, but because they threaten decades of image reconstruction and state-building efforts. Another factor is the emotional connection between Somalia and its diaspora. Few countries rely as heavily on overseas citizens for economic support, political influence, and cultural exchange. When harmful rhetoric targets diaspora communities, it is interpreted in Somalia as a direct blow to the nation itself. This makes the reaction not only political, but deeply personal for millions. The United States, meanwhile, finds itself navigating a complex environment in Africa. With growing competition from emerging global powers, some of which are expanding their influence in the Horn of Africa through infrastructure, trade, and security deals, Washington faces mounting pressure to maintain strong and respectful partnerships. Public remarks that alienate key allies carry significant strategic risk. International relations experts warn that if African countries perceive the United States as inconsistent, disrespectful, or hostile, they may redirect alliances toward more welcoming partners. For many analysts, the remarks and the resulting outrage were not isolated events, but symptoms of a larger shift. Over the past decade, Africa's geopolitical value has surged due to strategic maritime routes, mineral resources, counterterrorism priorities, and demographic growth. African governments now expect engagement based on mutual respect rather than paternalism. The backlash from Somalia demonstrated this new diplomatic posture clearly. Even nations still recovering from conflict will not tolerate narratives that strip away dignity or stereotype their people. As the immediate storm begins to settle, both Somalia and the United States face a delicate path forward. Somalia must balance the need to defend its image with the practical realities of global cooperation. The United States must evaluate how rhetorical choices affect not only domestic audiences, but strategic credibility abroad. Diplomatic channels remain open, but the trust that once defined the relationship has been shaken. What comes next depends on whether both nations can navigate the crisis with maturity and long-term vision. Somalia will likely continue emphasizing sovereignty, resilience, and reform. The United States may attempt to clarify or soften its stance through institutional communication rather than personal statements, allowing diplomatic professionals to take the lead. If the controversy results in renewed dialogue on respectful engagement, the crisis could ultimately strengthen relations. If not, the rift could widen, leaving space for rival global powers to expand their influence in the region. In the broader picture, the incident serves as a warning to the international community. Words spoken by national leaders do not remain confined within borders. They can ripple across continents, reshape alliances, and alter the course of diplomatic history. Somalia's strong and immediate response reminded the world that even nations facing internal challenges command respect on the global stage, and when that respect is threatened, they will defend their dignity with forceful clarity. The confrontation may have started with a handful of controversial sentences, but it has opened a larger debate about representation, partnership, and global power dynamics. It exposed the vulnerabilities of diaspora communities, the sensitivities of fragile states, and the responsibilities of global powers. As observers around the world continue to analyze the fallout, one thing is clear. This moment has etched itself into the evolving narrative of U.S.-Africa relations, and its consequences will echo far beyond the initial outrage.